Hello, and welcome to How a Large International Company Got Its Rim House in Order. This is a core content breakout session that has been pre-recorded, the M&A edition. Your hosts today and your speakers are Sandy Serkis and Bill Morey. I'm Sandy. I'll introduce myself and then allow Bill to introduce himself. I am the CEO and president and one of the co-founders of Valora Technologies. We specialize in auto classification, specifically for records and information management, information governance, and e-discovery. And this is, I think, possibly my 10th time presenting at some ARMA event or other, and I'm delighted to be here. Bill?
Hello, everyone. I'm Bill Morey. I head up the information governance organization at Oracle, and I work in legal operations there. I have been doing this for longer than I care to admit, 25 years and counting, and I work with a number of different attorneys and other staff on information governance, and strengthening the relationships between legal and IT in different organizations. I am looking forward to this presentation.
Okay. Bill, why don't you tell us a little about Oracle?
Yeah, I think most of you are familiar with Oracle. We are headquartered in Red Shores, California. We have about 125 or so employees. We have roughly $40 billion in annual revenue. We operate in 175 different countries with about 430,000 customers. As you know, this presentation is going to be about mergers and acquisitions. We do about 5 or 10 of those a year since 1994. We've done about 140 of those.
Tell us a little bit, Bill, about what 140 M&A transactions has gathered you in terms of content.
Yeah, a lot of content. So we've got, this project is really about our human resources mergers and acquisitions group. They have a dedicated team that has, actually most of that team has been working in that area for all of those 25 years or so. So over that period of time, they've got a collection of about 600 gigabytes and growing of various content that is segregated by acquisition company and, in different formats. So it's historically, that content has been stored in on-prem repositories. So they basically migrate that digital content from each acquisition as is. So it could be extremely variable in terms of the folder structure, how they name different documents. This is obviously, very sensitive content. So this project was really a priority for Oracle to start with the most sensitive, most important content, which is really content about acquired employees, and then move on from there. So you find that, for example, typical human resource type documents like employee files or employment agreements, one company might name those files by the employee name, another company might name them by employee ID, and so forth. So we have a tremendous amount of variability in terms of how those files were named and stored. So this project, really what this is to show you kind of a case study of how we approach this really huge problem and challenge, and then kind of take a deeper dive with Sandy into how auto classification actually works. So, the impact of this kind of environment is that we don't have centralized controls, where again, you might have, one company do it one way, another company is entirely different. The tagging is extremely difficult to follow. in some cases, the files actually don't have any names. And, the only thing that you can actually search on typically is the name of the file, nothing beyond that. So searches really, during that 25-year period, have been dependent on dedicated staff and tribal knowledge, where they know, oh, for this acquisition, I know that they saved their employee agreements in this format, and they name them in this fashion. So it's really dependent on kind of those staff going in and doing granular searches through enormous volumes of content. From my perspective in information governance, we have great concerns about being able to enforce retention policies that Oracle has and that I oversee. So in the absence of the appropriate metadata fields to enable that, it's difficult to impossible to do that. Typically, as most of you probably are aware, human resource type documents oftentimes will trigger the retention policies off of things like a termination date, for example, or hire dates, which in most cases, we have not captured those in these files. So the other issue is that you have scenarios where one HR person working with this particular merger or acquisition saved files to their hard drive and ultimately ended up putting those in our central repository. Another person did the same thing, unbeknownst to the first person. So we have multiple copies in many cases of the same files. So, we have a tremendous need to, kind of sort all that out.
And one thing I'll point out, having worked with Bill's team now for a couple of months, they have a situation that's very common, I would think, throughout the world. Take, for example, both of us. We are Bill and Sandy, but technically we are William and Sandra. And certainly for personnel type documents, that's where you're going to see proper names like that. But our colleagues know us as Bill and Sandy and will often file things accordingly. Oh, this is Sandy's files. Whereas if somebody's looking to search on Sandra, may not make that leap. And we're seeing that all over the place. It's a very common situation, particularly in cultures where it's very common to have multiple names. You see that in Latinx cultures very commonly, many Asian cultures. It just kind of compounds the impact of storing things kind of ad hoc. So I'll just chuck that in there.
Perfect. And the question is, so why are we doing this now? Well, really, like so many companies, Oracle internally is, like our customers, are moving their content to the cloud. So this became a part of a massive effort to move this enormous content store to Oracle's internal cloud. So it's kind of like when you move your personal house from one house to another. That's a perfect opportunity to kind of clean that house and say, oh, okay, these things have expired or we don't need this, and kind of find out what you need and what you don't need going forward. So you really want to always leverage those opportunities during moves to do deduplication, to better name things and so on, and basically make improvements. So we saw this as a huge opportunity within Oracle to do things like that. The other issue going on is, given the fact that many of these employees in this human resource group have been doing this work and been a part of that team for 20 plus years, they would like to one day retire from that function. And, so there's kind of this desire to better automate, better index and better automate and control this function so that eventually they could actually do that. And so we've kind of got planning in place to enable that. The other issue is that, Sandy, I am not able to see this because the band below is blocking the words.
Oh, huh.
Trying to move that down. It's not letting me move that, so I'm not seeing the...
If you want, I can cover the last couple.
Okay, sure.
Other, kind of below the tribal knowledge, one of the concerns that Bill has mentioned in the past is this need for compliance. And Bill, maybe you want to explain what you mean, what kind of compliance is around this type of content?
Yeah, it's a number of things, especially with the advent of GDPR, where you've got these enormous concerns about privacy issues and so on. It puts all the more emphasis around the importance of being able to show that, when these records that are highly sensitive, again, have met their intended life cycle or purpose, they are uniformly deleted. So that's a huge concern. It's kind of underlined the importance of having a current retention schedule, but also being able to adhere to it. And so because of all the issues we've talked about, that has been a concern with how we can readily do that and do that in a sort of an automated fashion so that, this team of HR staff don't literally have to go through document by document and try to manually enforce that. And that really was kind of the key driving factor, if you will, for launching this project, is that we need an automated and a more efficient way to do this so that we can do it, either enable, systemically the HR team to do this, or as an alternative, have my team in the information governance group be able to run reports and do this if, for whatever reason, the HR staff are no longer there or they don't have the bandwidth to do that. So it gives you really two options, but both of those, whether it's centrally done or done by the kind of the group that owns these records, can do it in a much more efficient fashion.
You actually covered off the last couple bullets, Bill. Almost called them
Perfect.
Bill bullets. Okay. Talk us through what the program is to implement this.
Of course. So really, we, in the spirit of start small and build, on those successes that you find, we started with a POC that is kind of modest size. It's 20 gigabytes of one acquisition collection of files. So they're, we can drill down and say, okay, all of these files we know with certainty are a part of X acquired company. And then we really go out and we can kind of use this as a test case to say what is important, both from a searchability perspective for those HR staff that are, having to go in and find these documents in response to litigation or hiring requests. And from a sort of a back-end compliance perspective for my team, what fields, what attributes do we need to capture to enable compliance with our retention policies? So that's been actually very interesting. Kind of alluded to this. One of the things is that, she'll get into more detail on this later, is you have a number of different methods whereby you can capture those fields. You can use optical character recognition, OCR, or you can use things like the folder structure and inheriting those names of the folders into the file itself. And most importantly, one of the things that we actually did as a POC that was very effective is to get a derivative file from our Oracle core human resource system that, for example, we took all the names for this particular acquisition of the employees that we had in our HRIS type system, and then bump those against the names of the files, the employee names of the files in our collection of actual documents here. And by linking those together, we're able to, add to that file, for example, for those that have terminated, we can capture their termination date, which in turn enables you to enforce retention rules to that. Also, we've captured hire dates, which is extremely useful to the human resource folks in, applying different tenure rules and benefit policies to those staff. So that has been very effective, and again, getting to a point where we can automate both searches and compliance. I have on my staff someone that is a black belt Lean Six Sigma person who is highly trained in different types of metrics methodologies. So as a part of a POC, I think you always want to select key metrics that you're going to focus on and measure before and after to capture the benefits and quantify the benefits of your project. So we are doing that. We're capturing things like how long did it take before and after finding a particular document, which we'll talk about later. And, and again, this leads to kind of what I call a leapfrog effort, where you take those, the quantified results of your proof of concept and use those to kind of share with your constituent audiences and senior management, whomever, to support the next phases for that. So, you know what, these are the benefits we attained, and based on this, we're going to go to phase 2 or whatever. So in the phase 1 proof of concept, it really has been about a 2 to 3 month time frame. We're coming literally to the end of that right now. And we basically migrated this sample set of documents to the Valora cloud in this case, where they are doing the processing of that. Again, once we get that, completed in a few weeks, we will kind of report out the metrics and the results that we've got and use that to kind of go on to phase 2, which is to apply the learnings. What do we have some challenges with? What worked really, really well? And migrate the remaining, 500 plus gigabytes from 140 plus acquisitions and repeat this process one by one for those acquisitions. And we expect that there will be learnings, again, in what attributes are important to human resources. For example, in this exercise, no surprise, we found that employee name, employee ID, and termination and hire dates are very important, but there are many other attributes that can be captured that we'll show you in a bit. It also enabled us to kind of refine what, how did certain rules kind of play out and which ones are effective or more effective than others. And then really scale up for doing this and saying, okay, since we've now got a successful concept, let's accelerate this and let's standardize and basically repeat the process multiple times. And really the last item, the last bullet, I think is really important to promote the results, because we have throughout this POC, we've had an ever-growing, ever-increasing number of different groups like marketing and our e-discovery team that I report into in legal, and our mergers and acquisitions finance team has an enormous collection of digital documents from acquisitions, much larger than the human resource collection, that they're very, very keen to see how is this going. Hardly a week goes by where they don't ask me for a status report, because this, again, they're looking to apply to their content. So phase 3 is really kind of what I've been alluding to is, okay, for all these people kind of watching in the wings, if you will, how can we leverage this same process? So really the biggest issue is from a technical perspective, is really move this content to select APIs, which Oracle has, a full library of different APIs that can be used for one-way transfers, for two-way transfers, and so forth. And basically to move the content store inside of, move the Valora engines inside of the Oracle cloud. So that's going to be very important, so that it's kind of sitting alongside of the Oracle content. They're both operating in the cloud, and they can do the processing much more quickly and securely. So that is kind of the final step, which we'll have to take through different Oracle, security approvals and so forth. And really, again, with a focus on every one of those that we do, let's really get measurements and, study the results so that we can continue to kind of promote the learnings and basically project by project end up where you've now moved all of this kind of content into highly structured, highly compliant repositories.
And I'll just jump in there, Bill. This last bit about extending out into other business units, we see this all the time. That's not unique to Oracle. Any large organization, whoever is kind of the leading authority, typically information governance or legal or records, who has made a successful implementation, everybody in the organization wants to hear about that because they're all fighting these same battles. And I want to kind of hammer home to the ARMA audience. You may not realize just how many allies you have out there who are otherwise tearing their hair out about content and the lack of management of that. Once they see a successful implementation, they literally jump on board. We saw one client, not Oracle, but kind of similar in stature, that is large global organization, go from one implementation to 18. And that was just within their organization, 18 different, we call them use cases, that kind of blossomed off of that very first one. Okay, I will jump in now to kind of show, Bill sort of alluded to some of this. What does it look like when it's done? This is I'm going to show you some screenshots from, yes, it's a Valora product, but it's basically a data dashboard. This is not going to be Oracle data for obvious privacy reasons. This is dummy data, but you will get an idea of what it looks like when, frankly, your rim house is in order. And so what you get are like dashboard views of the content that is organized by data facet or by tag. So you can see some tags here. Obviously, yes, file extension, you can get that now, but a far more useful version of that is the document type. And that is as specific or as general as is applicable to the client. In Oracle's case, they have very specific HR document types, and those would be represented in a chart like this. And those, of course, document type is also the kind of starting point for so many other types of analysis and management, like retention or lifecycle management. It's going to be a combination of what type of document is it and some sort of trigger, typically in HR, a hiring, a termination, as Bill said. So you're going to have this interplay between document type and date. So you can see there's a number of different date attributes that can be tagged and tracked and therefore displayed. Ultimately, when you're looking at a data dashboard like this, it is the kind of the sum total of all the back-end tagging or the auto classification that has already taken place. So this is sort of like auto classification served up into a pretty picture. That's essentially what these dashboards or data visualization is. The hard work is underneath with the classification, but it lets you kind of manipulate the content through all these different slices, whatever you might need at the moment. And you can, of course, also string them together. You can kind of run almost like a search without having to construct a big old Boolean string. You can literally just click, 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 and grab what you want. And that's one of the things that's been attractive to the HR M&A team at Oracle, how fast, how easily they can quickly get at their content, which, as Bill mentioned a moment ago, is one of the kind of key indicators of success. If it used to take them, an hour to find something, and now it takes 1 second, that's a tremendous ROI on their time and effort. So this is the kind of way that manifests. Bill, you can jump in anytime if you want to add anything to it. I'm just going to show a couple other ways of essentially data visualizing what's happening with that back-end content. So you can have relationships between topics and people, or dates and events. I don't have a snapshot, but you can have chronologies and things like a heat map where you're showing geographic locations of activity. And then inevitably, after you've either done a search or you've drilled down, you're going to look at visualization would have the ability to take you there. And that becomes more important in kind of a cloud-based environment or in a multi-repository environment, because at the end of the day, the user doesn't really even need to know anymore where the content exactly is stored. That sort of becomes irrelevant because they can see it here and they can always launch it from here without having to know or memorize or learn a complicated folder taxonomy. They can literally just, I call it the genie approach. Tell the genie what you want and the genie will bring it to you, as opposed to the map approach where you have to follow the map. So it's the genie approach where they can literally just say, I'm looking for this, give it to me. And in terms of kind of retrieval benefits, it's tremendous compared to having to kind of hunt it out yourself. So again, this is just quickie screenshots to give you a feel for where this kind of information goes. Phil, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
That's a good segue to the next slide where, it was fun when we actually, as a part of our POC, we rolled this up and we showed those exact screenshots and with actual live data to our human resources team. And I mean, imagine the difference between having to drill down and, when they get oftentimes an urgent request where, oh, you've got to find John Doe's employment agreement and we need it like in 10 minutes. And so you have to go to the appropriate acquisition folder and really do, again, depend on tribal knowledge and look at potentially multiple different documents, sort of a painful manual process. So when they saw this, where you could just, enter criteria like an employee name and find all this rich data, it was astonishing. So it really, I know most companies are faced with these similar kinds of challenges where you've got these enormous stores of content, and you need a way to be able to very, very quickly find what you're looking for and eliminate, the noise of things that would, false searches and so forth. So, it brings us back to kind of, measure the benefits and so forth. So, really, in a nutshell, this takes you from unmanaged, unstructured content to highly managed content in terms of both being able to find it in seconds versus potentially hours or days or not finding it at all, to being able to, know exactly where it is, and also being able to identify, oh, this person was terminated in this, in this year and date or whatever, and enforce retention and other policies to that content. Really, the astounding and kind of the long-awaited, incredible breath of fresh air in this project has been the reduction in manual effort and time that it takes to find content, which is probably conservatively 95% reduction in manual effort. And the response to, again, if it's a litigation request or someone that feels that their benefits are not, appropriately assigned or whatever, we know within seconds, A, do we have it, and B, here it is, and we can present it to the requester. And again, I kind of alluded, gives you options. It's always good to have options in terms of how do you enforce different compliance aspects of this content. And from my perspective, also from a privacy perspective, it's very important to be able to say, because of the nature of these records, that we are truly not keeping them, beyond the time for which they were originally intended. So, again, it gives you the ability to either give the controls for retention compliance to the owning records group, in this case, the human resource M&A team, or You may have scenarios where we see this quite often, where with huge teams, where there's, due to turnover, changes in the functional name of these groups and so forth, by the time their content is ready to expire and we need to enforce retention policies to it, the original people that worked with or owned those documents are long since gone. So there could be scenarios too where you want to say, you know what, give those controls to a central team, like in my case, the information governance group, who can run reports, who can manage that from a central position. The other piece is, again, you want to, as a result of your POC and your testing and so forth, have sort of a continuous improvement process in place where you build it once, you find out what works best, how you can merge, data most effectively to the actual files and so forth. Be sure you measure those vital few metrics that are most important that will demonstrate the ROI over a long period of time, and refine those continuously and promote them so that you basically accelerate the effort to move all of your content into this kind of well-managed format.
Okay, so the rest of this presentation, it's not that much, we're going to talk in a little more detail about what auto-classification actually is. Up until now, Bill and I just kind of hand-waved and said, yeah, there's some auto-classification under the covers. Now I'm going to explain a little bit what that actually is and how we were able to achieve all of these things with and for the Oracle team. So I won't go into too much detail here. If you would like to learn about auto-classification in detail, I strongly recommend you pop in on the Auto-Classification 101 workshop. There are ARMA workshops for all the Plus attendees. I believe it's the week after the week of presentation. So I think it's the first week of November. I have a 3-hour session on auto classification that, God bless him, Bill sat in on last year. And here we are 1 year later, which is a really neat milestone, actually. So I invite all of you to come to that. This is just going to be a lightweight treatment right now. So auto-classification really is kind of a combination of two underlying technologies. One is to create or extract or deduce a rich set of metadata tags about the content. And the other is to produce a set of rules, which are basically instructions about how to action the content, potentially at different points in time. So the rich metadata piece, which I often talk about the balloons, is essentially tagging. It tells you, what is this file? What is this content? And you can get as detailed and nitty-gritty on that as you like. Most organizations that we work with are tagging around 30 fields. There are going to be obvious ones about document type and record type, but you also get into some more legal ones like authors and recipients or custodian, the people fields. I would include in that, certainly for the Oracle use case, employee name, maybe supervisor. And then there's all kinds of other things that might be useful down the line, like business unit, product name, employee numbers or other classifications. Often we're tracking location, what city or state or country is either the content about or the person affiliated with. There's lots of different reasons that you tag content, and one of the things that we really try to promote with people is, as long as you're in there tagging for some fields, tag for them all. There's almost no extra overhead in doing that, and inevitably you will need that information down the line for some purpose or other. It might be litigation, it might be privacy, it might be just a migration that you're undertaking, but the tagging should be as rich and detailed as possible. And again, the rich metadata will tell you, what is this content. The second half of that is rules. And here's an example of, this is a very simple disposition retention type rule that says, okay, if you can tell me what kind of content it is, there's document type. The italics represent fielded data or metadata tags. So you can tell me what kind of document it is. Oh, it's a contract. You can determine its effective date, and it's less than this window that is part of my retention, then I know that that is an active file. Some nuances that might get overlaid in there would be things like, well, is it under legal hold or not? Keeping it simple for the moment. So this is an example of a retention rule. They are generally set up as conditional statements. If a condition is met, then execute the action. It would work for retention, it works for, let's say, redaction or data privacy, it works for should this be produced for a litigation matter or for an investigation. There's lots of different actions that you would take, and here's an example of them. Once you understand sort of the rule structure, the syntax, and how it interplays with those rich metadata tags, you start to see, oh, I can build all kinds of actioning or workflows that are based on the conditional circumstance of the content or possibly the passage of time. That gets obviously into retention and lifecycle management. So these are the different actions or dispositions of content that you can take using this technique. Typically, most clients will have a handful of these bullets, not all of them. Although, as Bill kind of mentioned earlier, what we start to see when we get into the second, third, fourth kind of use cases within an organization is that they all become self-referential. And often it's information governance that's tying them all together because they are the ones responsible for either retention or risk across the enterprise. And so you start to see this kind of cross-pollination lends itself really nicely with the rules. Bill, I don't know if there's anything you want to add in terms of metadata and rules, but feel free.
No, I think you've covered it. Beautiful.
All right. So what we're really kind of talking about here is what I would call modern auto classification. We certainly did not invent this term. It's been around for a while, and it sometimes means different things to different people. But basically what we're talking about here, and this is the big, I think, aha moment for many records folks and information governance folks, is that we are starting from the content up as opposed to policy or crisis down. So what I mean by that is understanding what that content is in the abstract first, and then applying the lens of what's happening. So, it's a contract between these two parties for these goods and services. That's what the thing is. How you might view that then might be a function of your role in the company or the mandate that you're operating under. And so that's what we mean. It's kind of the two pieces coming together. And this is in stark contrast to how records management has been handled in most organizations for about the last 2 decades. Because in that, what has historically been done is company comes up with a policy, endeavors to instruct everybody, and basically hopes that they enact correctly those policies. And we all know kind of how that's been going. With this approach, starting from the content up, and Bill alluded to this earlier, it sets it up for more of a centralized management of these tasks, and in particular in a group that actually, I was going to say cares, I don't mean to be flip, but has responsibility for this type of view. Most business line people, records management isn't really their number one task. It's probably way down on their priority list, whereas an InfoGov group, it's probably number 1 on their list. And so we are setting up for that more centralized, automated, kind of controlled management of this instead of the more traditional kind of ad hoc one. What it also sets up, of course, is this, I call it holistic, this ability to have the use cases kind of dovetail with one another so that every action you take, every additional population that you auto-classify reinforces all the ones that came forward, and you just get this kind of economy of scale that starts to build. Each new document that enters the picture amplifies the benefit for all the others. So it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy in that sense. The more that you do, the more you'll want to do. And then finally, modern auto classification, of course, is making use of a lot of technology. Again, we're not really going to go into this too much here. Come talk to me and I'll talk your head off about machine learning and AI, what automation workflows really look like, what kind of algorithms are underneath this technology. And I've added this last one because it's become incredibly obvious in the last 6 months of what an untethered workforce really means for the world and now for records management. It means that our resources are scattered. It's much harder to organize and control the people. All the more reason you want to have a centralized approach that is somewhat outside of the vagaries of the individual people. So that is really what kind of modern auto classification means today. It also has an evolutionary nature to it. Again, machine learning learns and continues to learn and is aware of things like the passage of time, which of course has an impact on things like retention. And so these technologies are adaptable and evergreen, meaning they persist beyond, let's say, the first migration or the first crawl through the data to tag it. They are there in the background monitoring and aware of the circumstances and adapting with those circumstances. So again, very different techniques here than most people are used to seeing. This is what we would call modern auto classification. I put just a couple of examples of what we would call a data request. This is a phrase that we find ourselves using over and over. A data request is essentially a reason to have to go through content. In Bill's examples, in the HRM&A, there's an employee issue, there's a litigation matter, maybe there's a privacy request. Whatever it is, all of those kind of stack up as data requests, and every one of them is a lot easier if you've tagged your content. So what we're seeing is setting up data requests as workflows against the tagged data. So that's that kind of hand in glove again between tagging and disposition or actioning. You can think of actioning as essentially presumptive data requests. So again, a lot more to come on this topic in my other sessions, but I'll just give you all a little taste here. Okay, so what we have found is that there are many different use cases for auto classification in a large-scale enterprise. There's usually one that is driving. In the case of Oracle, clearly that was the M&A activity driving, and which I would call inherited data. We also, interestingly, we have another client we work with that is heavily focused right now on divestitures. And so it's sort of the same process, but in reverse, where content is going to be leaving the organization, and it's a bit like a divorce where they have to figure out who's going to get what content, and some of it might be shared between the resulting multiple organizations that used to be one. It's sort of what Oracle's doing backwards. So it's just very interesting yin-yang of modern day business. Beyond those two, which again are sort of flips of each other, here are all the other use cases that we've seen come to pass, and that I'm sure maybe, Bill, you can speak to about some of those other groups or business lines that are looking over your shoulder for the HRM&A. Do they fit into some of these buckets?
Well, definitely. You know, they're so keen on seeing the results of this POC. And really, a lot of it, you know, for example, with orphan data, many of these teams have, unlike our human resource M&A team, they have staff that are responsible for content in much greater volume even than HR has, that they have no idea what it is. They were not around when the files were inherited, and so there's really, in many cases, they're lacking some of that tribal knowledge of what is it, and what parts of it are relevant, which parts are not, and really, they're kind of overwhelmed with the prospect of number one, fulfilling search requests because unlike the HR group, it typically knows if they have particular files or not. Some of these other teams, they have such huge repositories that they don't know if these files, they have no idea whether these files ever existed or not. And so the prospect of really on top of that, layering on retention policies, or more importantly, I know in the ARMA community, legal holds is a very, very important capability. And so when you have these huge document stores, sometimes you're faced with the prospect of, because if you don't have metadata and attributes down to a document or file level, you're almost faced with the prospect when you have legal holds to say, what, for this major group of content, for example, marketing documents or what have you, you almost have to say that you put the whole thing on legal hold or don't put it on legal hold at all, which is typically not an option. So you end up, having to do these very broad hold type actions, which is not ideal from a legal perspective. So, again, if you have the appropriate attributes captured and you're able to search on those and manage the files based on those fields, it makes it much easier and much more realistic, especially with huge document stores, to be able to enforce things like legal hold, which is so important, as well as, the next item, which is, on the front end, being able to kind of draw a circle around, these are the documents that are relevant to a particular investigation. These over here are not. And so you can effectively segregate those based on the scope of the hold. So that's a very, very valuable and important capability on the back end.
Okay. The last thing that we're going to leave you with is a little bit of maybe a lessons learned, kind of important topics that one way or another you will need to solidify. We want to set you up well that if you are considering an auto classification project, or you're looking to add tags to your content so you'll know what it is, these are the kinds of things you're going to need to think about. I won't go into detail on every single one, but I will give a shout out to one or two of them. One of the things that is very common now is where these kind of solutions should live. Should it be on-prem? Should it be in the cloud? Should it be in a public cloud? And the advice that I would give to everybody is you want your processing capability to be as close to the data as you can. So if the data is going to live on the cloud, move your processing capability alongside. If it's not, or you're in between repositories, then go ahead and, like we've done with our proof of concept here, send the data to the processing engine. But wherever it is, ideally you want those as kind of in close proximity as you can. One of the things to think about when you are a system like this is not just what does it look like right now, but where is the company going? Are you moving on to cloud? Then maybe you want to put your solution there, even if not all the data is there yet. You kind of also want to think about if you have long-term records, locations, where are they and where will they be in the future? So again, there's a definite eye towards future state in these types of projects. Similarly, the other thing that I'll kind of call out is connectors. Connectors are essentially technological handshakes that exist between systems, let's say between your auto classification engine and your repository, so that one can crawl the other without obviously doing any damage. So those are usually done through APIs. APIs are becoming increasingly important and powerful. There are new APIs being built all the time. There are new connectors all the time. So it's definitely a topic that you'll need to consider, and you'll need to, again, kind of future plan for. So APIs are always kind of coming out with new capabilities. So you want to, again, kind of aim for the future state on that. It's definitely a technological discussion that you're going to want to have with your supplier. And then the last thing that I would suggest you think about is to try and get your arms around what the content actually is. I'm not saying go in and look at every document, because that would take you forever, but even just things like how much is there? Can you get any sense of a gigabyte count or a terabyte count? Is it compressed or not? Is it approximately what kind of content? Is it business documents? Is it data? Is it email correspondence? Those are going to have very different metrics and kind of behavioral patterns that will be very valuable to the auto classification to kind of know in advance. So anything that you can provide that's informational, even if it's up at the highest level, is always going to be very welcome. So I will kind of leave these questions with all of you. If you're looking for how do I think about this type of project, here's your roadmap right in front of you. Start answering these types of questions, and you will be in great shape. Bill, anything to add?
No, that covers it really well. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so that takes us to the end. We did endeavor to have our live video being shown alongside. I really don't know whether that panned out or not, but we're definitely live people, and both of us welcome your questions and comments anytime. In fact, our whole kind of relationship here between Bill and Sandy is because he came up to me after this presentation last year at ARMA, and a friendship was born. So we encourage all of you to reach out to us. Bill, anything you'd like to add?
No, I encourage the same. Feel free to email me with questions. Happy to do this. This is what we live for.
Awesome. Well, thanks everybody, and thank you, Bill. And we will, I believe, turn it over to a live Q&A at this time as part of ARMA. Thanks everybody. Bye.
Thank you.